Hey everyone, Robert Ferringo of Doc Sports here with my main man, Ryan Sebring, to break down some NFL Week 2 action. We will get to Ryan in un momento, but first I would be remiss if I didn't mention that free 60 link that's down in the description. Use that link to go to Doc Sports and get $60, same as cash, to be used towards any handicapper for any package in any sport that you want. Also, be sure to like and subscribe this video and get yourself subscribed to the Doc Sports YouTube channel, where you'll be getting daily free plays and weekly informational betting videos from some of the top sports betting minds in the industry. All right, Ryan, we are going to get to Week 2 in the NFL, but first we got to look back a little bit on Week 1. You can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. Now, Week 1, we're all excited that football's back. We've been waiting months for it. But I got to tell you, my initial takeaway, my initial thought at the end of Week 1 is that I can't remember a worse weekend of football, quality of play. I'm not talking results, like a worse weekend of football ever. Like that was bad. That was bad football, start to finish, across the boards. Turnovers. I mean, you always have some wacky stuff go on. There's always some upsets. There's always a little bit of this. But just how consistently bad the quality of play was across the board. Turnovers, kicks getting blocked for touchdowns, terrible coaching decisions in terms of challenges and not kicking field goals or not going for it when you're supposed to. Like, what am I wrong? Like, am I just a little bitter because I didn't have as good a weekend as I wanted, or is there something to this?
No, you're right on it. I mean, as I sent you the note, and I think it goes back to starters, veterans, quarterback, your highest priced assets. You don't want to put them at risk in the preseason, so they don't get repetitions at full speed. So here we are, Week 1 of the NFL, and like I texted, you had 14 quarterbacks who didn't even throw for 200 yards. You had games where the quarterbacks combined didn't throw for 300. So the overall quality of offensive play was very poor, and I think it just lends itself to the defenses are farther ahead right now than the offenses because of the lack of preseason work. But the shoddy quarterback play was definitely my biggest takeaway from the weekend.
Is this going to be the theme of the season, though? Is this something that we see continuing, or is this just kind of, like you pointed out, a little spillover from not getting enough reps in the preseason? They had that now that they don't have that fourth preseason game, they have two full weeks of break in between. Is this just early season speed bump stuff and things will find its level? Or, as you look around on these rosters and look at these teams, there's some really bad quarterbacks. There's not a lot of really good quarterbacks out there. So is this something we should expect to continue?
I mean, it could be worrisome. But a lot of good quarterbacks had bad weeks. So you just look at all the turnovers that Allen had yesterday. Burrow didn't throw for 100 yards. I think it's going to improve dramatically in the next few weeks. And it gets back to your classic Week 1 overreaction. So it's like, okay, the quarterbacks are terrible and the offenses are terrible. I think the game is set up, the rules are set up for scoring. So I think all of that stuff is going to improve immensely. Now, there's always going to be the special teams breakdowns and things like that in the first month of the season. But, I was interested, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is like, I don't know how much shocking stuff happened this weekend for us to overreact to. There's maybe 2 or 3 themes that we'll get into, but I didn't really see a lot of things where we could grab a thesis from what we saw in Week 1 that may not have aligned of what we expected that team to do coming into the season. And now all of a sudden we have a totally different mindset towards that team. A couple of those that I know we'll get into as we look ahead to Week 2, but I thought it, with the parity in the league right now, Bobby, I just feel like, hey, what is an upset anymore, And I think you're going to have a pig pile of teams at 8-9, 9-8, 7-10, 10-7, and there's not a lot of separation. But I hope the quality of play improves in Week 2. And looking at some of the quarterback play and marquee names out there that struggled in Week 1, I would think Week 2 is going to be a big bounce back week, and I would look at some overs as a reaction to the play this week as a theme next week.
Okay, you beat me to it. That's exactly where I was going, is that we could actually quantify how
Yep.
sketchy the play was this week. 12 of the 16 games went under the total, and most of them weren't even close. The underdogs went 10-6 against the spread with a lot of outright underdog winners. So you are saying, looking ahead to week 2, you're expecting some offensive bounce back from some guys like Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, some of the names that you mentioned. So you're going to be looking to bet over on these totals, which, as I'm looking at the board, you already have, 1, 2, 3 totals that are at 44 totals, 5, 6, 7 totals are right around 40 right now. Okay. So you're saying even with something like the Pittsburgh Cleveland game, let's say Monday Night Football game, you're expecting a little bit more offense out of the Steelers than we saw last week? Or do you think that was kind of a harbinger of Matt Canada?
No, I think that's a harbinger of what's to come for the San Francisco 49ers. And that's definitely going to be one of my takeaways is, hey, what we thought the San Francisco 49ers were and what they have been at the top, or very near the top, it looks like they're right there. And what they did to Pittsburgh on the road. So I'm not going to judge the Pittsburgh offense by what I saw against a very stout, elite San Francisco defense. And I know there was optimism coming into the season for Pickett and the Steeler offense, but they ran into a brick wall apparently. I didn't get to watch that game closely, but there's just even like for winning quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, I just feel like there's room for that. Ravens offense didn't show me a ton against the Texans. And I don't want to hijack the show with all the examples of poor play, but I just think there's a lot of dynamic players that can bounce back in week 2. And not only that if the thesis doesn't play out in week 2, that I would just take it right into week 3, because eventually guys are going to start blocking, people are going to start running crisper routes, and the speed and the urgency of which the offense is going to need to play is going to start happening here in the next few weeks, even if it doesn't happen next week.
Okay, well, I say go for it. Who worse? Let's say maybe 2, 3, 4 teams, players, situations that you feel played out exactly the way that you expected them. Can you think of
there was one big
one?
Was Atlanta, Carolina. How about a heavy-duty grinder with a ton of defense and not much downfield offense, and Atlanta gets a gritty home cover? Like, that was all I could come up with in that thing. I mean, like, there was nothing else that I would say exactly went the script. Maybe San Diego and Miami in a thriller, but I probably expected San Diego to win that game. I wouldn't say anything else was exactly the script. The Ravens labored terribly against the Texans, and I don't think anyone expected Dallas to hammer the Giants the way they did. New England gave Philadelphia all that they could handle, and we've anointed Philadelphia coming into the season. So I don't know. And obviously the biggest upset that we're going to talk about is the Rams going on the road to Seattle, who everyone was very excited about Seattle's chances this year, and they got throttled. So they're going to be one of my week 2 bounce backs after our week 1 overreaction.
Okay, well, let's stay there. Other than that Seattle Rams game was, for me, was the biggest surprise, right? Like, I had the Rams as the 3rd worst roster in the NFL, thought it was going to be a pretty bleak season. I released that as a free play video last week, and in there I mentioned I'm not as high on Seattle as a lot of other people are. I still have major question marks about their defense. Can Geno Smith do it again? I don't love their offensive line. You always look at those teams, right? Half the teams that make the playoffs one year aren't going to make it the next year. So you got to look at those teams who are the most likely to not make it. I had Seattle as one of those teams that wasn't going to make the playoffs this season. But still, I was surprised that at home in that environment, they lose to a Rams team that isn't very good. Frankly, they played pretty well, but they didn't do anything spectacular in that game. They rushed the ball 40 times, which you love to see, good, hard-nosed football, but they only got 92 rushing yards out of it. So it's not even like they were even cramming it down their throats. So we take a team like the Rams, who are coming off that very surprising win. All right, we put them at home against San Francisco, team that you said, look, they are who we thought they were.
Absolute buzzsaw. Yep.
The Rams are an 8.5-point underdog at home in that game. Is there still some value on the Rams? Are the Rams better than people think that they are there?
I want to wait and get more information. But getting back to the Seahawks, though, them plus the 6 at the Lions, who, hey, are the Lions going to get over the hump? They have all these expectations coming into the season. They beat Mahomes, hand them his first ever week 1 loss, prime time. So everyone's excited about the Lions. Everyone is obviously very down on the Seahawks after what they saw last week. I don't know. I love the Seahawks plus the 6. That was the first game I double started because we're feeding into, hey, this is what we've now formed these new opinions after week 1, and we like to take advantage of that. So that was actually one of the first games that stood out to me where I thought there could be some value. The Rams, though, covering that 8.5, I don't love that because San Francisco, once they, can you stop their run? And if you can stop their run, look at all the other weapons that they have, and defensively, you're not going to get very much. So I don't think I'm going to make betting against San Francisco one of my themes for the season.
Okay, sticking with that theme, looking at the numbers for next week, did you see any other lines out there that you felt were just flagrant, blatant overreactions to what people saw in week 1?
I thought the lines were pretty good. I don't know if I saw like a line that jumped out to me outside of that one, but there were some other games. The Bears at the Bucks was one that jumped out to me. The Bears didn't play well week 1. Another team, expectation for Fields, it really has to take a step forward this year. Not a bad roster. They got throttled at home. Now they're going to Tampa Bay. I'm sure there weren't a lot of expectations around Tampa Bay. They won a football game. Now they're favored. I like some value in the Bears there, who, if the results would have gone differently last weekend, that game was probably more of a pick 'em. So we probably generated a little bit of value there. And for some reason, the Dolphins and the Patriots, the theme of just like the Lions, can the Dolphins handle prosperity after what they were able to do on the road at San Diego, go to New England, who showed some signs? And New England's catching the 2.5. I think both of the theme with those two is handling prosperity, the Dolphins and the Lions. So we'll learn a lot about them in this game. And then the other game that really stuck out was the Chiefs. Can Mahomes go to 0-2? They're on the road at Jacksonville, who's probably trying to lay their marker down early in the season, right? So I think that spread's probably a little bit different than what it could have been had the Chiefs come out and won by 2 touchdowns last week. And that number looks a little small to me. But go ahead, Bobby.
Yeah, no, that Miami-New England game, to get on that, the Patriots absolutely outplayed the Eagles in that game. That 70-yard interception return for a touchdown early, which bounced off the guy's hand. It wasn't a bad play or a bad throw or anything like that by Mac Jones. It was just kind of a fluky thing. But they outplayed Philadelphia in that game. And now, real tall task for Miami. They have to go on the road. I believe it's 3 of their first 4 games are away from home. So they're on the West Coast last week. Now they got to go up to Foxborough and face a team that's trying to avoid 0-2, a team that's familiar with them. I kind of agree with you that I don't know about installing them as a favorite in that situation. They very easily, they deserve all the credit for winning that game in the fourth quarter. They very easily could have lost that game with how well the Chargers offense played in that as well. But the two overreaction numbers that I kind of honed in on. Now, this isn't to say that I'm going to jump on both of these games, but the two numbers that kind of both had me scratching my head were Green Bay being favored on the road in Atlanta. Okay. The Falcons did not look very good. They didn't play that great, but they still won by 2 touchdowns. They're at home. They didn't really have to break too much of a sweat against the Panthers. They were never really threatened in that game. Green Bay, they put up 38 points. They won by a blowout. I watched every single snap of that game. The Packers really didn't impress me. That was more about Chicago's incompetence and what they didn't do than what it was Green Bay did. Jordan Love was 15 for 27. He barely completed over 50% of his passes. They only rushed for 2.8 yards per carry. I think they had 32 rushes for 92 yards. So they put up 38 points, but it's not like they were some offensive juggernaut flying all over the field. They were 3 for 3 in the red zone. That did it. They took advantage of some Chicago turnovers. Chicago went for it on 4th down on their side of the field, didn't get it, and then Green Bay just capitalized. So I don't know about the Packers, like people buying into the Packers. I've already seen them in some people's power rankings, top 10, and stuff like that. I think people are getting on the Packers bandwagon a little bit too soon. The other one was Indianapolis being favored on the road at Houston. I know a lot of people felt like Indianapolis kind of outplayed the Jaguars for 3 quarters. They looked like they were going to have a great chance at an upset. They 100% looked like they were going to cover the spread in that game. Didn't. Are people jumping on the Anthony Richardson bandwagon a little too soon? Like, can you explain to me how the Colts – now, these are two bad teams, right? The Colts and the Texans are both terrible. Well, why are the Colts favored on the road here against the Texans?
And now that you've talked about those two lines, they are sticking out to me. And, I was really impressed because obviously I grew up in the Baltimore area. My family are big Ravens fans. So we actually watched that Texans game very closely. It was broadcasted because I'm in Texas. I was really impressed by the Texans. And even Stroud, who I'm not the biggest fan of these Ohio State quarterbacks, he actually had a little urgency getting the ball out of his hand. And I think as a collective whole, I like their coaching. I like the direction that they're going in. And if they can't take advantage of this game right here, catching the one against the Colts, I think as we get deeper in the season, that the Texans will come through on some lines. I just don't know if they're ready. But the Falcons at home plus the 1.5, that's so compelling because coming into the year, that was one of the teams that we liked anyhow, was the Falcons. And we thought that they would overachieve expectations. So here's just a first opportunity at home, getting points to just play out the thesis that we had coming into the season, which was we thought there was value in the Falcons. So here's just an excellent opportunity to try to take advantage of that, because I think that looks great, especially with the Packers getting that big, 38-20 win on the road, and then Atlanta kind of grinding and struggling with Carolina and a rookie quarterback, even though Carolina has an outstanding defense, and I knew that game would be like that. But I agree with you, Bobby, that the Falcons being underdogs by 1.5 does seem like an anomaly to me.
Yeah, I just think that coming into the season, people were bailing on the Packers. Then after one game,
back on
one win against a bad Bears team that played poorly, now everyone's like, okay, Jordan Love, he's the new Aaron Rodgers. So, all right, looking at maybe not some lines that jumped out at you, maybe the numbers are good, but is there another situation here on the board that you're looking at that just is compelling to you? Either maybe it's a stay away, maybe it's a game that you want to see what the number does this week. What other game caught your eye going into week 2?
You're going to think I'm crazy, but I feel like the Commanders can go out to Colorado and Denver and beat the Broncos. I don't think the Redskins played that well. Maybe Arizona's better than we think, but I think the Commanders can play a lot better than what we saw. And I'm not sold on the Broncos at all. So that was another one I had a star next to, thinking that there was some value there, that they have a stout front seven, and I don't think they played their best game last Sunday. And I think they can play better and will. And then obviously,
if they hadn't turned the ball over, if Washington hadn't turned the ball over in that game against Arizona, that would have been a 2 or 3 touchdown game. Like they just shot themselves in the foot. And then late in that game, they actually had an opportunity to get ahead of the spread. Washington was my top play this weekend, so I'm a little salty about this. But they had the ball inside the Arizona 20 with under 4 minutes left, up by 1. So a touchdown here basically puts the game away. Instead, and they're inside the red zone already. Eric Bieniemy calls 3 straight off-tackle dive running plays and kicks the field goal. Like that, I don't know if that was cowardice. I don't know if it was stupidity. I don't know what the problem was. I understand him being like, look, we don't think they can score a touchdown, go up by 4 points and win. But that's cowardice. You're not going to win a lot in the NFL giving up situations like that where you could end the game right there by putting your foot on somebody's throat and not taking advantage of it. So, I agree with you that Washington didn't play their best game and won, and Denver just looks a little undermanned right now, especially offensively. I think they need Jerry Jeudy back. Not that he's some all-pro, but right now that offense is struggling in a big way. Okay, let's get back to the Ravens and let's talk a little bit about, the AFC North. 2 big divisional games in week 2 here. Let's start with the Ravens. They won handily, didn't play sharp, but that's a better than people think Houston defense. They are now going into Cincinnati to face a Bengals team. They got absolutely humiliated. Ravens are underdogs. Do they have a chance here to really knock Cincinnati to 0-2 and take an early control of this division? Or is this bounce back city for the Bengals here?
That's a great question. I would lean it to bounce back city for the Bengals because Burrow didn't even throw for 100 yards and it was just a train wreck. They couldn't block anybody. It's worrisome because the Ravens have a nice pass rush too. So this isn't the week to, where you're going to get a reprieve on that front and the Ravens are going to be aggressive. I mean, I would think that the Bengals would play a lot better and they have a good football team. And I'm not sold by what I saw on the Ravens. 3.5 is always tricky because those interdivision games like that, it's almost like you're tempted to take the Ravens plus the 3.5. But if the Bengals came out and really comprehensively beat them 28-17, it wouldn't surprise me at all because I think the Bengals are at the top of my list for bouncing back. And then what was it? The other game was in that division.
Pittsburgh and Cleveland. Cleveland, same thing. Yep. Cleveland won convincingly, just like the Ravens did, but now they're going on the road to face that rival who's trying to avoid going 0-2, who played like trash in week 1. The Browns. The Browns are a team that I was a lot higher on than a lot of people. I think I had them number 11 in my preseason power rankings, which was a lot higher than a lot of people had them at. If they beat the Steelers here, that puts them at 2-0 with 2 division wins early on in the season. Do you think they can get there, or is this just vintage? The Steelers have owned the Browns for 30 years. They're not losing to Cleveland at home type of thing.
Well, you would think that, the Steelers' offense should be happy that San Francisco group isn't going to be around anymore. But Myles Garrett looked very active week 1. So I don't know, once again, if this is the week that Steeler offensive line and what they're trying to do offensively and get better, is that going to happen against this Brown defense and Myles Garrett? So this is one of these lines that over the last 25 years, I would have absolutely said, I'll trust the Steelers to not go 0-2 because I thought they were going to be terrible last year, and I think they finished better than 500. They have the coaching, the track record, all those things. But my gut tells me in that game that the Browns are going to go in there and their defensive line is going to dominate the Steelers, and they're going to win that game by a field goal.
A little bit surprising to see Pittsburgh as a home underdog against the Cleveland Browns, basically.
Very surprising.
Now, Cleveland's defense, one of the reasons that I like them, I love them bringing in Jim Schwartz. I love them changing up their whole approach on that side of the ball. More blitzing, more attacking. And you saw this with the Giants last year when they brought in Wink Martindale, going to that full-on blitz attack. Early in the season, those teams, those defenses that blitz a lot, you always see them have success because offenses, like we talked about at the very beginning of this, offenses are not as sharp now as they're going to be in 2 months. And if you are putting pressure on teams, you are going to have a major advantage there. So for me, that's one of the biggest matchups in the AFC. I'm more interested in this Cleveland-Pittsburgh game than I am the Kansas City-Jacksonville game for that reason. I want to see if Pittsburgh is going to be able to make these early adjustments. Now, going back to that Bengals game, the Bengals are 4-1 against the spread against the Ravens in their last 5 meetings. They've had Baltimore's number. You watched a lot of that Ravens game, as you mentioned. Give me your first snap judgment thoughts on the new offense that the Ravens are running. Because
if they didn't give Flowers, I would give it an F. Go ahead.
Right? The whole storyline coming into this year was, we got Todd Monken. Roman is out. Oh, yeah. Why? Hate on Greg Roman. All that guy did was bring top 5 and top 10 offenses to Baltimore. They bring in Monken, who's a college guy. It works in college when you just have better players than everyone else. I don't know if putting the ball in Lamar Jackson's hand as a thrower and expecting him to go out and win games is the way to go moving forward. But what was your first take on the Todd Monken, Ravens, Lamar Jackson?
It was absolutely terrible. But and obviously losing Dobbins isn't going to invigorate that offense, although I do like Gus the Bus. But what I saw was 9 completions to Zay Flowers. So he might actually work out for him. But Rashad Bateman maybe had a couple grabs. Beckham, I think I can guard him. I think Andrews is working back from an injury, so they got a long way to go. I think they have some good pieces there. But what I saw week 1 wasn't super encouraging, and they're not there yet. No way. And I definitely want to give the Texans credit in that game. They played a pretty good football game, even though they got Dallas by almost 3 scores, whatever.
All right, I'm gonna put you on the spot here before we get out of here. Thursday night, Minnesota going to Philadelphia.
Yes.
Getting 7 points. Now, Minnesota, they lost in week 1, but they completely outplayed Tampa Bay. They outgained them by like 140 yards. 2 Kirk Cousins fumbles took away scoring drives. He had an interception. Like, there was no doubt that Minnesota was the better team in that game. They just didn't win. That's how it goes sometimes in the NFL. They are catching 7 points here. This Minnesota team, they refuses to play a game that is decided by more than 3 points. So give the people a little free play here. Minnesota, Philadelphia. The total's at 48 if you want to go that way. But which side are you looking at here early in the week for this Thursday night matchup? Minnesota.
I mean, I would take. Yeah, I would take Philadelphia laying the 7 because I still have visions of Dallas going to Minnesota last year and beating them by 50. So I think I'm mentally tainted by that. But I think the Eagles can play a lot better. Like, you look at the numbers for Hurts, and I think offensively they're going to want to do a lot more than they did last week. I know that the coach of the Eagles has already talked about the lack of preseason play, that he may change his philosophy on that. I don't hate the Viking squad, but I think the Eagles Thursday night prime time, coming off that tough game against New England where they didn't show out that great. And to your point, I know Vikings, they're probably a very active underdog, but a gun to my head, I take the Eagles in that game laying the 7.
All right, folks, he is Ryan Sebring. I am Robert Ferringo. Hope you enjoyed this look ahead to week 2. Be sure to check back next Tuesday when we have your video previewing week 3. Thank you to everyone. Take advantage of that free $60. We are Doc Sports. Carpe diem, and good luck.